Hello everybody, and welcome to this thematic workshop on service design in employability, what it is and why it matters. I am going to be one of your co-hosts this morning, along with Maja and Zsara from Glasgow CVS. And Jane, as you may have guessed, from Social Enterprise Scotland, is providing amazing tech support in the background. This is a kind of partnership session, if you like, so it's set up with support from both Social Enterprise Scotland, GCVS, TSI Scotland Network, and the National Third Sector Employability Forum. So just need to recognise our sponsors, just even though they're not giving us any money for it. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Pegs Bailey. I am the National Third Sector Employability Partnership Engagement Manager, and also a big passionate supporter of all things service design and chair of the National Service Design in Employability Working Group. On this session, you're going to hear a little bit from me about the policy context to all of this, then from Zsara and Maja from GCVS, who are very well practiced experts, I might even say, in the field of all things service design. And I'll talk a little bit about, they'll give you lots of the theory and the tools, and I'll talk a little bit about how this work has been developed in the context of employability. There'll be time for chipping in and comments and questions throughout, and our wonderful friend Barbara is keeping an eye on the chat for us. Okay, without further ado, this is the Scottish Government policy context for employability, and the banner, for those of you that aren't familiar, is No One Left Behind. Budget is partially devolved for all things employability to Scottish Government, and under the banner of No One Left Behind and the policy context, that is then devolved to local authorities as the lead accountable bodies for how that money is spent and reporting into Scottish Government on impact. However, decisions around how that money is spent are expected to be made by local employability partnerships. So this is a beautiful cog diagram which kind of shows all the different moving parts in that. And the local employability partnership is that lovely big pink cog down at the bottom right. And it shows the kinds of organisations and stakeholders that we would expect to see as part of that. However, one of the things that is really unique and very important about No One Left Behind is that there is a very strong expectation that the perspectives of people who are impacted by unemployment or economic inactivity are brought into helping shape and inform our plans, our priorities, and our services, because there is a recognition that that is going to lead to better outcomes for all. So there, that orange cog there, people with lived experience inputting to local decision making. And one of the methods and frameworks which we use for doing that engagement work is the Scottish approach to service design. So clicking on to the next slide. For those of you that have been around No One Left Behind for some time, the whole policy is based on these key principles about dignity and respect, about providing person-centered support, that whatever we come up with is straightforward for people to navigate, and that it's integrated and aligned with other services. It provides pathways to sustainable and fair work, and this is the critical one, it is driven by evidence, including data and the experience of users. So I think the next click will highlight that one for us. There we go. Ultimately with the goal of supporting more people to move into the right job at the right time. So that's the context and the policy framing for why you might want to care about this thing called service design. I'm going to hand over now to Zsara, I think it is, to talk to you a little bit more about what service design is, and yeah, some of the theory behind all of this. Thanks.
Lovely, thanks, Pegs. So hi, I'm Zsara, I'm the service design lead at GCVS. So a wee quick note, Maja and myself, we run a whole day training and half session follow-up on this, and we still have plenty to discuss at the end of those. So this will be a whistle-stop tour just to give you some of the basics and hopefully some directions to go and explore further after this. So just as a kind of show of hands, either physical hand or with your kind of virtual Zoom hands, has anyone heard of the double diamond before? I'll just adjust my view so I can see it all. I'm seeing a couple of thumbs up. Yep, just a couple there. So the double diamond is the backbone of design thinking or the service design process. And for the next slide, this is an overview before we dive into the stages of the process. So the process takes us from opportunity right through to delivery of something. You start the process without understanding what that will be at the end of it. The double diamond helps us to focus our energies in the right place. So the first one can be summarized as designing the right thing, and the second one as designing the thing right. It can also be looked at as how things are currently and then how things could be in the future. So if the first one is about designing the right thing, the second one is about the kind of quality of the solutions. So as problem solving creatures, especially people in the kind of roles that we'll be doing, it's very easy to kind of skip to the end to creating the solution and to skip past that first diamond. And Maja and I are always saying, we don't think that the first diamond gets enough love. So to kind of go through the stages, so the next slide will show us starting at the opportunity. So we've got it here as opportunity. You can think of it as a starting point, a catalyst, a problem that needs to be solved, a challenge that needs to be tackled. And there's various levels that this could apply at. So it could be creating a new service, improving an existing one, looking at one particular aspect of a service, or looking at how multiple services interact. So the next slide will show the first part, which is problem discovery. So that is really opening up and diverging out, making sure that we really understand the problem, looking at the different aspects, the different parts, the layers that are there. It's about really opening up and asking those questions. So we use the term problem as part of the kind of double diamond. But if that doesn't really resonate with you and with your situation, you can sub in opportunity, status quo, unmet needs, area of improvement, whatever sort of language works best for you there. So as part of this problem discovery phase, a tool that you can use here is sort of asking why, and asking why over and over might be familiar to you if you've ever been around small children. This is called the 5 whys, and we've got an example of the difference that this approach can make. It helps us to really understand the root causes, not just the symptoms that we can easily see. So an example on the next slide here is of an organisation that's identified an opportunity to improve volunteer retention. So a lot of volunteers have left recently. The volunteers make a critical contribution to the organisation, and they want to know what can be done about it. So if this was you and you weren't familiar with the double diamond, you might put out a survey to past volunteers, ask them why they don't volunteer anymore, and maybe the answer you get back is, I just don't have time for it anymore. So what can you do in that situation? You can't create more time for people, and so you might sort of be resigned to the fact that there's not very much that you can do at all. But with some service design tools in the toolbox, the conversation could look a bit different. You might be able to invest some more time in that problem, in that problem discovery phase. You might meet the person for a coffee or have a chat on the phone, and dig deeper in the conversation. And it could go something like this on this next slide here. So it could be that, first of all, they say that they don't have time. And so that you dig a little bit deeper, and they say, oh, well, actually, I don't have time because I want to prioritize other activities. It's important to note that this 5 whys, it's not an interrogation, and the questions that you'll have in person will probably have a bit of a less robotic feel than just sort of why on repeat. But in the course of the conversation, they might share that they just want to spend time doing other things and to prioritize other activities. And then really beneficial for them, that they just felt that these other activities supported their mental health better. And so by asking why again and digging a bit deeper, the conversation can continue, and you can explore exactly what that means to them. So they share that in their other activities that they feel part of a community. And digging a bit deeper about that, it's about them feeling valued and appreciated by others. And then a potentially uncomfortable question for the person asking, because presumably they've been involved in the kind of volunteer aspect of this and looking after volunteers. But the uncomfortable question could be, did you feel volunteered? Did you feel valued and appreciated here? And that's where you know, that feels like we've kind of stumbled upon something that is within our kind of sphere of influence there. So we've gone from the conversation of not having time, which is something that we have very little influence over, to exploring whether current volunteers feel valued and appreciated, which we do have some control over. And so moving to the next slide and moving us on with the double diamond, the first stage can uncover lots of complexity of branching problems with further symptoms, and we can't tackle everything at once as much as we might want to. It can also feel a bit overwhelming at this point. And so this second part of the first diamond is about narrowing the focus. So based on priorities, things that you have influence over, and really sort of defining what that area of work that you're going to be doing could be. And so the next slide, we have this middle stage, that kind of bridging step. We capture this as a kind of how might we statement. It can also be called a problem statement, but it's that sort of a synthesis of the first stage of the opening up and then of the narrowing back down, and really giving us that starting off point for the second diamond, where we'll be looking at solutions. So the example here, about previous examples about volunteers wanting to feel valued and appreciated, can be expressed as, how might we ensure our volunteers feel valued and appreciated? And it's a bit more specific than how might we stop our volunteers from leaving, but it's not so specific that we jump straight to solutions, even when that can be really tempting at this point. And that's what the second diamond is for, is to explore those solutions. So for the next slide, we've got a bit of a jargon alert here, ideation. So this is about considering all options and creating lots of ideas for how to address that how might we question that we posed. It's about gathering a variety of ideas, from like the obvious ones to the weird and wacky. This stage is best when you suspend your judgment and use blue sky thinking. So forgetting about some of the constraints you have, and really just opening that right up. And then for the next stage, your judgment hat can come back on, and we'll be converging again at this point. So assessing the ideas by viability, feasibility, desirability, looking at all the ideas gathered and deciding which could and should be implemented. There's another bit of jargon here, prototyping. Prototyping is about creating a version of your idea. It could be a storyboard on paper, or it could be something physical, but it's a kind of low fidelity version of your idea that you can show people and get feedback. And the process of implementing that feedback to improve it is what we call iteration. And so the next slide here, what we get to at the end of this is something that's able to be delivered. And so the next slide here shows us at the delivery stage. And at this point, having gone through the process, the most likely outcome is something that is effective, that everyone involved in is happy to have a go at implementing. and evaluating. And for the next slide here, just a kind of couple of notes to say on this. If it all feels a bit too simple, the two neat diamonds, it's because it's a simplified version of this. In reality, the process is continuous. It requires a mindset, sometimes a mindset shift for people to be continuously looking for opportunities to improve. And this sort of ongoing process reflects the changing landscapes that we are dealing with, of changing needs, changing constraints, and the need for our approach to be flexible. And the next slide here to add to that, when you're going through the process, it can sometimes feel a bit more like this. And that doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It probably means that you're dealing with a lot of complexity and that you're embracing that mindset shift of not racing to solutions and of trusting the process. The double diamond is a tool in the toolbox. It's not to hold back or slow you down. You don't have to bend over backwards to try and fit your work neatly into it. Sometimes there's a lot back and forth, and we all know things are messier in practice. But what I can do is to help you navigate through the key stages of finding efficient, of doing that kind of efficient and effective problem solving. So that's the double diamond. It's versatile and it's used across sectors. Next slide, please. It's also it's used by the private sector to create apps and airports and other kind of for-profit activities. But to contextualize it for our kind of work, the Scottish approach to service design is a version that grounds it in a Scottish context and also in a public service perspective. And although it's written in the context of a public sector, it's also relevant for the third sector as we deliver public services and we collaborate with the public sector. The Scottish approach to service design is currently going through some development, and with that with a kind of third sector lens to it as well. So before we jump in a bit more about what the Scottish approach to service design is, I wanted to get you a show of hands again, physical or your virtual hands using the buttons, just to check who is familiar with the Scottish approach to service design. And I'll just change my view so I can see you again. I can see some thumbs up. Some thumbs up, but not too many there. So the next, please. I'm going to read some statements and I want you to put your hands up if you agree with them. So the first one is, we should try to understand the problem before we look at solutions. So if you agree, put your hands up. I saw Maja's hand shoot up there. Brilliant. I'm seeing some hands. Brilliant. So the next one is, hands up if you agree in their lived experience. Some people will be glad it's virtual hands, so they can hold them up for longer. The next one, please. We should engage people at the early opportunity, not just pick solutions. So sometimes we think that we're doing participation when we say, do you want A, B, or C? Okay, lots of hands up here. And the final one, engagement should be inclusive, accessible, and meaningful. So hands up if you agree with that. Brilliant. So great news, if you had your hands up for all of that, you are aligned with and are embodying the Scottish approach to service design. I'm not surprised at that. The next slide defines what that is. So the vision for the Scottish approach to service design is that the people of Scotland are supported and empowered to actively participate in the definition, design and delivery of their public services, from policy making to live service improvement. And much like the No One Left Behind is captured using 7 principles. So the next slide shows them here. They were reworded slightly for the hands up exercise, but they are: number 1, we explore and define the problem before we design the solution. So that's that first diamond, and really taking the time to dig deeper and understand the real issues before jumping to solutions. Number 2 is that we design service journeys and around people. Number 3, we see citizen participation projects from day 1. 4, design methods so citizens can participate and meaningfully. This is making sure that we really reduce the barriers to participation in these types of projects, particularly those seldom heard voices and the people that we really need to hear from. Number 5, we use the core set of tools and methods of the Scottish approach to service design. Number 6, we share and reuse user research insights, service patterns and components wherever possible. I think this is a really important one, especially for when we're working together. Sometimes people have already done user engagement, citizen engagement, there's already a report on it, there's already some insights, and we don't have to be duplicating work. Sometimes it's not always new. You know, when we start off in that first diamond, it doesn't always have to be new work. It can be looking at what's already there. And it can also really help with a topic that comes up a lot around engagement fatigue and the kind of idea that some groups are asked the same things over and over again, and they don't always see the changes that they're promised. And then number 7, we contribute to continually building the Scottish approach to service design methods, tools, and community. And that's part of why we're here today talking about it. And so the next slide here. Yes, so what can we take from the Scottish approach to service design? So I think for myself and Maja, and the work that we do, it kind of boils down to things. So it's about problem before solution. It's people are experts in their lived experience, that we aim where possible to always engage from the start, and that our engagement is inclusive, accessible, and meaningful. And the next slide here is a wee pause, just to open up questions for clarification. So if there's anything, that was a whistle-stop tour. I can talk quite fast sometimes. There was a lot of slides. So if there's any questions on to kind of clarify anything that I've said already. I'm not sure how we're going to do this. Is it hands up for questions or questions in the chat?
Yeah, I think if people have either hands up or questions in the chat, either of those are absolutely fine. We've just got a couple of minutes because we've crammed a lot into this session. So if there aren't any, we won't mind. We will move on because there's lots more to talk about. And just as things go, people can pop them in. We've got a sort of more substantive pause, ideally sort of around 3-ish or just before 3, so we can stop again then if nothing's leaping out for people. I'm not seeing any hands up unless there's or anything in the chat. So yeah, should we just move on?
Sure. So this is an image that we use a lot in our sessions because I think it's really recognizable, and it's something that we can see in public life quite a lot. So we've got user experience and design here, We use this because Maya and I are both designers, so we can tell on ourselves a little bit that sometimes we have been the people who've created these beautiful paths, but that's actually not what people want and need. And this sort of path has a specific name. It's called a desire path, because it's so common. And it's just, I feel like a really clear image of what can happen when we don't include that lived experience. We don't include the voice of the citizen or the voice of the families. And to build on that, on the next slide here, we've got a really great graphic from Christina, who we'll be hearing from later via video, who has created this triangles of perspectives. So to really draw attention to that green triangle there, so the experience, so people with first-hand experiences of the problem that you're trying to solve. But also the blue triangle of that frontline and delivery staff is really important, and bringing together that leadership with the strategic decision makers. And when all of that comes together, that's when we get really efficient, effective solutions to the opportunities or the problems that we're trying to solve. And so I believe the video is next. So we're just gonna take a little second. So am I sharing this one?
Yeah, I'll give a little intro explanation if that's okay while you're getting that set up, Zsara. So just for those of you who haven't heard Christina speak before, which is probably most of you, Christina Graham was unable to join us today, but she supported our last Introduction to Service Design webinar and has kindly agreed for us to share a little bit of her talk from that to the recording. So Christina worked with me on a series of programs that we ran, co-production programs in Fife around No One Left Behind originally, having kind of come in as somebody who had had significant challenges, dropped out of university due to mental health challenges, and left kind of engagement in any work for quite a period of time. And this was kind of, we're picking up her story as she's talking about a really positive conversation she had with a work coach who at DWP in the job centre, who really gave her the time she needed to think about what mattered to her. And this is what happened from that conversation onwards, hopefully.
Yeah. And just checking that looks okay on the screen.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when about 2019, when I'd done my counselling and I was ready to maybe start volunteering or go into work, we had this one conversation that always stands out, and it's, Christina, what do you actually like to do? Like, is there something so left field, out of the park, that you can take on to be like a career or a job that you've never really thought of? And again, because I was on limited capability, I had this time to breathe, I had this time to think and not be stressed about any other circumstances that were happening, and all of that. And I realized that I still do, and it's I like to give feedback, and I'm the person that emails Amazon when a button isn't working. I'm the person that reviews a Sky advert because they might have said something that could be triggering to neurodivergence or mental health or whatever. That's me. I am the annoying person. So from that one conversation kind of snowballed with the support worker that I also had at the time. And we cut to 2019, where that support worker got an email through. Pegs can correct me if it's a bit hazy so long. There's this session that I've been invited to bring a client. Are you comfortable with it? It is totally up your street about giving your experiences that you had going through counselling and the DWP. If you want to attend and not say anything, that's fine. And if you do, even better. So I attended that. I managed to speak up a few times. I was still in not a very good place, but I was definitely getting better. I was excited again for to go back into work or volunteer, maybe not quite work at that time. So yeah, that was such an enlightening experience. But then, of course, 2020, the pandemic hits. That was fortunately a positive experience for me. All the conversations that were going to be taking part with that project that Pegs was running was all moved on to online. So I wasn't quite ready for rooms and rooms full of people. So that was like a really good thing for me, that it moved online. I could be in the comfort of my own home and give all my opinions and ideas and feedback about the services that I had used. So I'd obviously used unemployment services and mental health services. What these conversations did was give me my voice back. I felt incredibly valued in these conversations. There were a mixture of decision makers and delivery partners, people with lived experience, all in these meetings. And there was never one time that I ever felt that somebody had more power over me in these conversations. It was a genuine environment of learning and creativity and being like, we want to get this right. And I've always said that to this day. And what happened during that was there was a lot of sharing of vulnerability. I was able to talk to people again, these like horrible experiences of my mental health and unemployment, to actually better the services in Fife. And that's such a huge thing for me. And once again, I felt incredibly valued by the end of it. Respected. I was given the space and the time to articulate what I was trying to say. So from there, Pegs and Anne Fearful at the time, who was the lived experience team coordinator, asked me to volunteer with the lived experience team here at Fife Voluntary Action. And what we did with No One Left Behind was sort of not replicated, but we got involved in various other projects that had the same vein, that had the same values, at least within the team. And we wanted to make sure that we got that message out, that involving people with lived experience matters. And if you're going to make a service, who best to ask on how that service is run than the people that use them.
So Christina worked for FEA for a number of years. After that, she's now moved on to another job. I think the thing that really resonates for me is the point where she says, I think we're going to need to get onto the next slide. That's great. Where she says, what these conversations did was give me my voice back. And I don't think we can underestimate how incredibly important it is to give people, if they want, and if they are in the right place, the opportunity to help us make services better based on their experience. Because it doesn't just improve the services that we develop, it actually has a massive impact when it's done well on the people that are involved and invited into that space. This is just a lovely quote from a book that both Zsara, Maja and myself will rant to anybody about very positively, Beyond Sticky Notes, and Kay McKercher, who really just encapsulates that point. And when we make decisions on behalf of other people, we assume we understand their dreams, needs, experience and capacities, or lack thereof. And in doing that, we overlook their knowledge and their skills. And I would suggest we actually actively undermine them. And I think that's particularly true in certain contexts where we can get very protective unnecessarily. So yes, next slide, please. So that's why it matters to people who we might be working with and the difference it can make to them. But why does it matter to the land of employability? Well, some of you may have seen me share this slide before, this cartoon. I feel it is relevant in many contexts, but in this particular context, it really, for me, epitomizes the difference between the theory that we have had in the world of employability for a long time, where, there was this idea that, we take unemployed person X and we give them input of interview skills and work experience and CV writing skills, and they become employable person at the other end, Y, of that little linear lovely journey. And we see it in employability pathways, which are very useful frames for helping us plan our services, but not really good descriptors of people's life experience. It looks much more like what's going on outside the box there. In fact, when we did the No One Left Behind co-production work in Fife, one of the key learnings that we had is that this thing called employability that we tend to treat as an issue of the individual that we're helping is actually a really complex concept, which is not only to do with what's happening for themselves, their own sense of confidence, their own skills, work experience and qualifications and so on, but is also to do with external context that they are trying to find work in. So whether there are available jobs that are appropriate, whether there's stigma and discrimination that they're coming up against in the workplace, access to transport, healthcare, childcare, and so on. So actually, once we start understanding employability as a complex concept, we understand that every single person's journey to work is unique. And we also understand that we are going to need to have quite a diversity of services in play, because what works for me today might not work for me in 3 years' time or even next week. And what works for me might not work for everybody on this call. So it's really important that we're taking this kind of service design and complexity mindset into what we're doing. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk you through, there's a lot on this slide. I did think about breaking it up into 4 separate slides, but I kind of wanted to keep it all on one because it shows how diverse the different ways we can kind of come into talking about and using service design tools in the context of employability. So I'll talk about Fife first, because that's the one I'm most familiar with. That's where I worked and did all the work with Christina and others. So in Fife, our local authority and local partnership, employability partnership, gave funding to the Third Sector Interface and me to facilitate a large-scale service design piece of work to look at and understand what we might want to do differently about commissioning our employment services and what we put in place when the whole No One Left Behind policy first was announced. So we had a diverse steering group, which included people with lived experience of using unemployment services and those who had decided not to use them, but were still unemployed. We co-designed together a series of collaborative conversations which brought everybody together to talk about what would and wouldn't work. We had an online survey, all of which, as Christina mentioned, had to happen over lockdown in the end, which, you know, did cause both opportunities and challenges for us. But we ran that piece of work. It was started a long time, like a year before we actually completed it. A large part of the engagement happened over a sort of 3-month period. The findings then informed how we ran our No One Left Behind commissioning process, so guided £3 million worth of spend, if not more, for Fife, and we created principles for service delivery and so on. As a result of that, other things happened. We restructured our LEP governance, and we now have a lived experience panel who help assess and inform, make decisions on bids that are coming forward. And we have lived experience representation on the oversight group for those funded projects. So quite an important shift in how we were thinking and what happened as a result. Glasgow also took quite a strategic, or been taking quite a strategic view. So they're very lucky as a local authority. They have a centre for civic innovation that's full of design experts. They also have Maja and Zsara now in Glasgow CVS. So lots of amazing skills and resource. And they have, over a period of a couple of years, run a full-scale service design process using a combination of surveys, focus groups, and face-to-face sessions with internal staff and external stakeholders to help shape recommendations for how things should change. And things that are going forward as a result of that are changes to commissioning, piloting work around lived experience, involvement in employability, and more. So that's kind of two kind of more of the strategic scale ends of service design. Dumfries and Galloway, actually, they partnered with the Service Design Academy, so brought them in as experts to train up their own staff and work with local third sector organisations. And they took a very targeted place-based approach. So they found and identified the two, one area in the first instance and then another areas which had the most kind of entrenched high ratings on the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation and kind of low employment levels and other health-related indicators and poverty-related indicators. And they ran a design process with community consultants, surveys, door-to-door engagements, drop-in sessions, and a whole host of ways for people to get involved give their ideas, and the findings from those informed creation of local hubs with support services. And then they ran it again in this second area, and I think they're doing it again in another. And what's happened is that the flavour of these local hubs and what kind of has resulted has been different and has been unique to each of those areas. So really important learning there. And that was not just about employability, it was about community learning and development as a whole. And then in Orkney, their employability division is actually hosted within the community learning and development department. And their work in this began because they had a community centre they wanted to kind of repurpose to become a hub, an opportunity hub or something for people who were unemployed that would help them on their journey to work. And they created a team of volunteers or they invited in volunteers, people who were affected by that issue, to help them understand what should be in it and how it should be kind of laid out and so on, the whole design process. But that was so impactful and effective that they decided to continue working with this group of people who named themselves the Jedi Council. And obviously there's been an iteration, this was some years ago, of volunteers on that group, but the group still stands and continues to inform much more than just the hub in terms of their mapping the local pathways, helping design service information, and they are an official subgroup of that local employability partnership. So you can start, service design can happen at a very strategic level and kind of designing how you're doing your whole commissioning work. It can start at a very project-based level of actually what we're going to do with this community hub, or it can start at a geography-based level, and anywhere in between. Some people would even say you can probably take that approach in your one-to-one design, conversations with people that you're supporting. Okay, so moving on. Ooh, we are on time. So I'm going to pause there for a minute. This is your chance now to either, if you want, nip off, grab a cup of tea, have a comfort break, because we're going on until 3:30, or either put your hand up, ask questions. We can probably take down the slides, Jane, actually, at this moment, or pop any questions you have in the chat about what you've heard so far. I think probably the really important thing to say is that there is, in my world, never, ever something that is a daft question. In fact, if you are thinking, oh, I didn't quite understand that bit, then there's a very strong chance that there is somebody else on this call that is thinking the same thing. And so if you can feel brave enough to pop it in the chat or put your hand up, you will be doing a lot of other people a favour too. So yeah. I can hold a silence. Not very well. It's normally me that asks questions. Is it making sense so far? Okay, I can see some nods from those I can see on cameras. Yep, getting little thumbs up. Okay. Is there anything that would worry you about trying to bring this in to your own work? Linda, did you unmute there?
Yeah, I did actually. I was just going to bring in one question, and it might be a daft one, but I suppose it's the timelines of funding can sometimes, clash with people's organisations' ideal to get it right. So under No One Left Behind, sometimes you want new stuff, new innovation, new services, and that. I think if you haven't got an infrastructure in place with your live design input, is that sometimes the timelines can be a bit challenging for organisations. So I'm just throwing it in there as a reality, but that's because people can be intentional, about wanting to involve people in particular applications if you're putting them in. But I think the realities sometimes can be quite difficult. That's all I have to say, really.
No, I think that's a really important point, Linda. And I think, well, I'll open for Maja and Zsara to come in as well, but I think there's something about many third sector organisations might be doing this, and other providers, don't want to just preference the third sector just because that's what I know best, but many organisations may have almost informal structures that they do for engagement and discussion and collaborative thinking. And this is an opportunity to maybe formalise that, but you don't need to wait for funding to come through or opportunities to happen for this work to be kind of almost becoming part of the culture and the system of the process. We've got something new we want to do, let's take a service design approach. Or we've got a service that's actually been running for several years and maybe might be feeling a bit tired. Right, why don't we use a service design approach to thinking about what we're doing there? So I think if there are ways of thinking about bringing this into the day-to-day of your organization, that is going to be the biggest win, because then it does mean that when those opportunities do come in, you're fairly well placed to pull something out quickly. What absolutely is the worst thing that can happen is where there's a funding deadline, everyone goes, right, quick, pull everyone together, we'll have a focus group, we'll tick their box that we've asked people what they think, and then and that can leave people feeling very used and undervalued. And also, I think, to be honest, back to that 5 whys thing, you don't get the level of trust and depth of insight because there isn't that trust within the system. And I want to just pick up on, well, actually, I'll open up to Maja and Zsara on that first, and then we'll come to C Park. Don't know your first name. Do you have anything you want to add, Maja? Yeah.
I'm really sorry. I was busy typing away in the chat and I'm really bad at multitasking, so I only caught the end of that. I'm really sorry.
That's okay. Zsara looks like she might.
Yes, my internet cut out there. But from what I understand from the question, it's about sometimes it can be difficult to do that in the timelines. Was that the
Yeah, it was the funding timelines and so on.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I think something that Maja and I really like to underline is that sometimes these things can be quite informal as well. And that's where I think people who are doing frontline service delivery, they are continually having conversations that can inform what's going forward. And people who work in frontline kind of jobs, they know how to have these conversations as well. They know how to approach these things. They know how to do it sensitively. They know how to have the conversations. And it's just about, I think, what happens with those insights. And also, it doesn't have to be new stuff as well. So if you've already done a kind of volunteer survey and or something similar, you can use the insights from that for something else if it applies. But one of the, I suppose, not a con of this type of work, but something to consider. Sometimes things, they take longer this way sometimes, but it's time well spent. But I do take your point, especially around funding and funding cycles, that can be tricky.
Yeah. Just to come to C Park's point about the staff, Maja has replied. I think this is a really important point for us, is that sometimes with service design, there can be a shift, or co-production, which I would say is a subset of service design. There can be a shift to very much centering only the voice of people who are using services, and sort of almost escalating that influence, which is, and I can understand where that comes from. It's a counterbalance to a long period of time of that being devalued and undervalued. But actually, in my experience, where things really work, as the triangle shows, is where you've got all 3 perspectives, sometimes even in conversations together, because that, certainly with our steering group, that creates an amazing amount of insight, because everybody's learning. People who are using services are learning about what it's like on, the constraints of delivery and the constraints of leadership. Leadership are understanding the constraints from the other perspectives, and frontline staff are also kind of maybe sometimes understanding that things that they do in a very well-intentioned way might be experienced slightly differently by people that they're supporting. So kind of any opportunity you have, either at steering group level or within engagements, to kind of do that work safely and well together is fab. But definitely voice and perspective of people who are delivering services is also absolutely fundamental. Karen, we'll come to you.
Hi, I think you have, in just your answer there, started to answer my question. I suppose just taking those sort of casual collaboration conversations to the next step, and where there's resistance at different levels within an organisation, what sort of strategies have you found most effective in really shifting that to the next stage and changing that sort of mindset?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting one. We might talk a little bit about that later on, but I would also, I think acknowledging that it's there is the first thing, and that that's okay and it's normal. People are feeling protective of either their role or their authority, or the fact that they're being pushed on from above to do certain things, or that there's going to be criticism of their service. So understanding that that's there and working sensitively with that is probably the first thing. And then the research says a lot is about just learning through doing. So one of the most impactful things I have found is finding little safe ways, and it can be small and safe, to bring people together and have a collaborative conversation, and for everybody to kind of realize that it's actually all okay. So one program we did around mental health and community mental health and wellbeing in Fife, I think I'm okay to say this, there was quite a lot of uncertainty initially about allowing people with lived experience of mental health challenges onto the steering group. And we had quite a lot of conversations around what needed to happen to make that feel safe for everybody involved and so on. But then once we did, like 6 months down the line, it was hard to imagine that had ever been an issue, because everybody could see that there were really important and valuable perspectives that were being brought on. So always trying to find little windows and opportunities, and the more that we do that, the more people realize it's actually not that scary, and it's really okay. Yeah, Zsara, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think just to build on that, being able to show some examples of where it's worked and where other people are doing it. I think the examples that Pegs has shown are really great to kind of illustrate and to give people confidence in the process. And I think that's something that needs to kind of be reminded throughout the process as well, because there's parts in the process where you think, oh, why are we doing this? Why did we bother? And that's part of it, because we are trying to work differently, and we're trying to use those mindsets. We're trying to get comfortable with not knowing what the outcome is going to be, or where that's going to take us, and we're trying new things. So it's just real acknowledgement for people that there's a lot of discomfort like throughout it, and trying to manage that. But I think good examples are always really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That's been helpful. And I suppose my experience has been where a lot of those sort of collaborative conversations taking place, as you say, day to day for those, but it's elevating that to important decisions as well. And as you say, from that whole sort of service design and those, that leads to those bigger decisions as well. So no, but thank you.
That's great. There's one more comment in the chat, which I think actually Maja and Zsara, you might be best placed to answer, which is around getting people involved with lived experience kind of beyond, forms and surveys, which I think, yes, cannot help, and ideas around that. So
yeah, I think surveys sort of always seem like a good idea, but because we ask quite closed questions, it kind of gives us the illusion of understanding the problem, when actually there's still a lot to be explored, particularly around capacity, and when you've got a lot of people, it's important to have a think about sort of meeting people where they're at and what opportunities there are. So I know of people who have gone along to things like community breakfasts and other activities, and sort of taken 10-15 minutes just to to run something quickly with people, and then maybe bring it back at the next one to sense check it. It's trying to see where people are at, and what existing opportunities there are. The other thing around that we've found quite helpful before is around really understanding that kind of reward and recognition process for, I suppose, what people what they get from taking part. So there's a lot of soft things, like people find it really helpful to talk about their experience, to share with other people, to be part of these types of activities. but we've also looked at practice around you know, payment for participation, particularly when it comes to more intense co-design sessions, looking at staged approaches to engagement so that we can sort of do interviews with a large number of people and then more focused work with a smaller number of people. So it's sort of looking at where are the people that you want to speak to, and if you don't already have the relationships, who does have the relationships with them? Because it's not always, I mean, a lot of times it's not always right for me to come in and start asking the questions because I don't have those relationships. So it's about utilizing those as well. Yeah, I see that Pegs has put that in the chat. She's also said about co-designing the surveys is a really valuable process. So yes, quite often the questions do change a lot, and that can help with the uptake. But yeah, it's a kind of question to have a think about in terms of who you're looking to reach, where they are, who has the relationships, and what do you need to know.
I think this is moving us actually really nicely into the second phase, isn't it? So Maja, do you want to just lean into the slides, or is there anything you want to say before we do that?
Not anything that I don't think has already been said. So yeah, I'll get us started with actually, if I could ask Jane to share the slides again. I've not sorted out all my tabs, but that would be easiest. And let's see if I can request remote control so I'm not badgering you every 5 seconds to change the slides. Okay, so we wanted to, I guess, leave you on something like that felt quite concrete and practical, which is what can you do to support empowering service design? We've heard about why it's important to do such service design, to get people participating in the process, and how empowering that can feel when it's done right, but it's not easy. So we wanted to dig into it a little bit more. And before we do that, a little bit of background. Oh, can I figure out how to change the slides? Yes, I can. Perfect. So, oh, too far. I think there's maybe just a little bit of a lag, so bear with me. No, you know what, Jane, I think I'm going to go back and just ask you to do them because I can't seem to be able to control them. Okay, perfect. Starting here. You might have seen this before. It's the IAP2 participation spectrum. You might be familiar with a different participation spectrum. There's a couple of them out there. But each rung of the spectrum is basically a different promise that we're making to people when we're seeking their participation in something. So from maybe we'll just inform you all the way through to like we'll implement whatever it is that you tell us, and a few bits in between. And service design can't happen at inform. We do need to get people participating, but it can happen anywhere from consult all the way through to empower. So if I ask for the next slide, please. As we go up that spectrum, the thing that's changing, I think, is that as we move up, we find that there is more power being shared by those in positions of power, for example, decision-making positions with the citizens or the community or lived experience groups, or whatever your context might be. Next slide, please. And when we think about power, a lot of the time, the connotations that we have with it can be quite negative, but actually at its core, all that it means is the ability to affect an outcome. So we've heard why it's important to work in sort of collaborative and empowering ways, but again, coming back to this thing of what can you practically do to support that? And I'll ask to skip forward 2 slides, please, Jane. So, okay, perfect. So I've brought back the co-production triangle from Christina that we saw briefly earlier. And here I wanted to sort of get you to reflect on, within your role, you know, what is your role within the sort of service design process? Is it that you're sort of in that purple leadership triangle, making the strategic decisions? Is it that you're more sort of somewhere in between, maybe like coordinating the service design process? Is it that you're actually the person standing up in front of people when you bring them together for workshops or focus groups or whatever you're choosing to do as part of that process? Is it that you're hosting and facilitating those discussions? Is it that you're participating as someone who's bringing their professional experience, for example, like frontline delivery experience, or is it that you're participating as someone who is bringing their lived experience? And again, I'm going to ask you to bear with me because a minute ago I had a bunch of different options that I now can't see for launching a wee poll just to see who we've got in the room. So I might ask one of my colleagues. Oh, there we go. Perfect. It's up. So just asking you to reflect on which of the following sort of most resonates most resonates with your role within a service design process. You might feel like you straddle a couple, but just whichever one most resonates. So we can see who we've got in the room, and I can spend more or less time on the slides I've got coming up. Okay. Perfect. A nice mix. And I think the other thing I think is really important to say here when we talk about empowerment, a lot of people think it's quite a contentious and controversial word because it implies that people don't actually have power until we give it to them, which is not true. But I think in the context of asking people to come into sort of our world of work, there is a power imbalance, right? And in order to share our power, we first need to recognize where we have it. And so, yeah, as we sort of look at that list of different roles, there is a bit of a power differential there. And some of the places, I'll just, if you're curious, I can share the results of what's come through so far. But some of the things that can sort of influence what power we hold in a space, as for example, our titles, how we're introduced, can really sort of change how people perceive us. Whether we have like the access and the time and the resources to take part in these things, if we're being paid for our time, whether we have power over making certain decisions, and are we part of any marginalized groups, and how are those groups represented in that space? If we're the only woman or the only person of color or the only like disabled person in a space, it can make us feel a little bit odd. So something to consider. And I think the key thing here is it's not an exhaustive list. There'll be loads and loads of things that feed into this, but these are some of the things that we might want to consider. So a little bit of background on sort of the participation spectrum, the different roles that we might play and what influences power. But I want to deliver on the promise of leaving you with some sort of practical thinking points based on where you're at. So I'm going to ask for the next slide, please. Right, so if you answered that you're sort of responsible for coordinating that service design process and making sure it all happens, this is where I want to bring back the spectrum, because I think it's really, really useful for planning sort of our messaging around the engagement that we're doing, because absolutely we should strive for that more collaborative or more empowering ways of working, but that's not always within our gift. There might be sort of constraints around how decisions need to be made, or what time or what resources we have to do the engagement. And the key thing is to not overpromise and be quite transparent about where we are within the spectrum, and going back to those different promises that we can make to people participating based on that. And if we just end up consulting, that's totally fine, as long as people know that they're just being consulted. And actually, regardless of where you sit on the spectrum, there are best practices that you can pull from and apply. For example, the national standards for community engagement can be a really helpful starting point. Next slide, please. And bringing back the double diamond, which feels like a lifetime ago, but I guess considering that typically we know that we can't do a good service design process without some form of engagement. At the very minimum, we would expect that engagement would happen at least once in the sort of problem diamond and at least once in the solution diamond. But what happens in between quite often is that it's sort of the professionals, people coordinating that process, that take away the insights and the data and analyze them and synthesize them and make all the little decisions that are necessary to move on to the next stage in the double diamond process. But I guess the alternative to that, if I could have the next slide, is that we carve out more space for people to be involved throughout the whole process for that to be more empowering. So people with lived experience can absolutely be, with the right setup, involved in synthesis, those small bits of decision making. They could even be involved in sort of identifying the very opportunity that we're using as a starting point. But again, they don't always have the gift of time. And so in this coordination role, some of the things we might think about are, for example, what materials can we prepare to present information in quite a digestible way so that people can easily sort of process what information has been gathered so far, what's happened in the process so far, so that everyone's starting from a sort of the same understanding, not having to spend loads and loads of time going through different documents, but how we communicate data. And I think the other thing is maximizing time together by actually adding a little bit of structure. So rather than saying, well, we'll just talk about something, which can end up sort of going around in circles, using things like, for example, liberating structures, or just little ways to structure and facilitate workshops that are more conducive to collaborating and making decisions together. Okay, right. If we move on to the next bit, I'm going to quickly speak to that sort of leadership, because we spoke a little bit about the constraints that might stop us from working further up this spectrum. But if you are in a role, in a leadership or a decision-making role, it could actually be within your gift to help shift things up the spectrum by committing to these processes, their outcomes, advocating for them, supporting these ways of working, setting aside the budget so that it can be meaningful and inclusive. We often say that service design is 10% designing and 90% creating the conditions for service design to happen, which can feel quite frustrating, but with leadership sort of holding a protective umbrella over the work, it can feel so much easier. And if you're not quite sure about service design and co-design, or you feel like you would struggle to make the case for it to other people in these spaces, there are so many different case studies and things like that out there that can help you make the case. And who knows, you could play your own role in sort of building up that bank of data that can support us in implementing these practices. Okay, and then last but not least, I was looking at this slide earlier. It's very rudimentary, but I think it gets the point across, right? When we bring people together, those people, are not a monolith in terms of their views, their experiences. They might have different priorities. Some of those might be intentions. So it's really important that with that in mind, we can provide the right space to have constructive conversations. And obviously the responsibility for that lies mostly with whoever is hosting the space and facilitating it. But I think actually all participants play a bit of a role. And something that can help us have a more nuanced conversation, a more constructive conversation, and work and make decisions together is something called psychological safety. It's another bit of jargon, but I think a really important one, I guess. But basically, this is about whether people in the space feel safe contributing, whether they feel safe respectfully disagreeing with one another, whether they feel safe sort of bringing their whole selves into the space and sharing things that can potentially be quite vulnerable. So on the next slide, there's just a question, because I wanted to stop here, stop talking at you for a second and pause and ask you whether you have any ideas or any experience that you might have in creating psychologically safe spaces. So any methods to create a space that feels psychologically safe, anything you've done before, if you want to pop it in the chat or raise your hand. I think we've got time for maybe a couple hands if people want to share, or feel free to pop something in the chat. Okay, so we've got asking participants what would help them feel safe before making arrangements. Absolutely. And I think the one that goes with that is just like a broader access requirements that people might have. We're not mind readers, so asking can go a long way. Ground rules at the start of a conversation. What is acceptable? Absolutely. I like to say that every space will have rules, and they can either be sort of like unwritten and unspoken, or they can be transparent and out in the open, which can create a much more conducive space to people, yeah, feeling safe and comfortable. Oh, both of their points have been said. Okay, grand. Anyone else wanting to share anything? Time for discussion. Work as a group to create ground rules, having a good facilitator, ensure everyone can contribute. Absolutely. If you want to keep popping them in, please do that. I'm conscious my time is running out, so I'll bring you to my last slide, which is basically just one I prepared earlier. But we've covered a lot of these points. So creating and maintaining a working agreement. I think, yeah, doing that collaboratively can be a really great way to kick off, collaborating within a group. Ensure confidentiality and anonymity. Ensure emotional and practical support and how to access support during and after. Yeah, absolutely. So many good points, and some I could add to this for sure. But the other one I had is back to our sort of use of language and titles. Creating the space so that everybody can contribute, and when they do, making sure that those contributions are heard and valued. So it goes back to someone made a point about good facilitation. Moving at the speed of trust, sort of letting those relationships build organically can feel quite frustrating and maybe a bit slower than we'd like it to, but it really pays dividends. Trauma-informed approaches, ensuring access needs are met. Modeling vulnerability and being genuine, I think, especially as someone in a sort of perceived position of power, if you're able to bring yourself into a space in a way that's open and honest and genuine and vulnerable, it can really go a long way. We've got warm welcome and hospitality. It's hard to feel sort of psychologically comfortable if you don't feel physically comfortable. So making sure people have things to eat and drink and are comfortable. Relevant information in accessible formats. Again, making sure everyone's starting from the same level of understanding the context we're asking them to engage with, and making decisions together and finding ways to do that meaningfully. But I think I'll leave it there. My mouth is very dry, and I'm going to pass over to Pegs to give us an example of how this is done in practice.
Okay, thanks, Maja. Yeah, so moving on to the next slide. So these are actually some slides that which Christina, co-created some of the information on the left. Don't worry about the fact you can't read half of that. The point is that the kind of more colourful image on the left are examples of leaflets which were developed for the community mental health and wellbeing engagements that were done in Fife. That was bringing together staff and people using services, and a recognition that talking about our mental health and well-being can indeed be quite triggering for some of us. So so they created a self-help or kind of an advice leaflet with places to go for extra support, little boxes you could fill in to think about your own self-care plan, and they also tailored those to the localities in which they were going. So if there were different services in different areas, they were adapted. What was really, really important, and I cannot emphasize this isn't enough, is that we need to think about the psychological safety of everybody who's in the room. There is sometimes a tendency to worry about the poor people with their lived experience, who I might actually say have often lived through some very difficult stuff and might be a little bit more resilient than we might think they are, and to sort of almost, it can feel very patronizing and very singling out if you're the recipient of that. But also, in my experience, actually, the staff can find these spaces incredibly vulnerable and difficult to be in, either because of their own life experiences or because the conversation is around stuff which is about the work that they're deeply passionate about. And the only person I've ever had leave a room in tears was one of my first ever sessions, total numpty. I wasn't prepared for this at all, and it was somebody who worked for the job centre. So I think we have to think about creating safe spaces for all, because that is what matters. So that's the first point. And down on the bottom right, we've got the ground rules we had for our first ever No One Left Behind conversations, the ones that Christina came into as a participant. And some of the things that we found were useful, like no high hegens, no badges, no labels. We've talked about that. I think also just recognizing that it's absolutely okay for people not to speak. Actually, sometimes showing up is enough, and maybe in 2 or 3 or 4 meetings time, they might actually contribute something which is really, really important, but they would never make that contribution if they hadn't been able to participate non-verbally for a period of time first. And that kind of recognizing that we need to be kind to one another. I use the phrase a filter of good intent in a lot of the work that I do. Recognize, and I think just even naming that at the beginning of a session can help everybody understand that we're all here because we want to make things better, even if things might feel a little bit personal to us. I am very aware of time, so I will skip on to the next slide. I've actually done a bit of research on some of this stuff. So this slide is based on research into what helps with co-production in particular, but also based on the experience and the work that we've had, the work that we've done in Fife. So very, very briefly, there is something absolutely essential in this work, which is about authentic leadership. And that breaks down into 2 core component parts. First of all, we have to come to this work with a genuine curiosity and interest to understand something from different perspectives. If we are coming into any engagement process thinking that we are going to get validation for what we think is already right, or to tick a box because we need to for Scottish Government or our funders or whoever it might be, people will know and they will walk away, they will disengage. So it's very, very important that genuine, authentic curiosity comes into this work, and a willingness to actually change what you're doing as a facilitator or what's happening within your organization as a leader. But also the leadership bit is really critical, because as you saw from the squiggles that Maja showed earlier, it can get super messy, and that is really demotivating for staff and for citizens that are getting involved in this work. You're giving up your time and it's just all a bit tricky and a bit messy. And that leadership can be as simple as giving a clarity of the arc of the journey of the process, where your key timelines and markers are, the key decision points. But it also can be summing up at the end of a meeting and a discussion what you've all agreed and what's going to happen at the next meeting. So it doesn't have to be something complicated, but that creating of a safe container is really, really critical. And back to the point about ground rules, it's all very well having great ground rules, but if you don't stick with them and hold others to account to them, then actually that undermines a lot and can really create a sense of unsafety. And again, I put my hand up to having done that. I've been wrong-footed, thought I've got my ground rules, everybody's going to be fine. And then when people have not worked within the ground rules, I've not felt confident to say, hang on, sorry, I need to pause you there. So really important. We need to recognize that we are going to face disagreement, however uncomfortable that is. That is, if we aren't having conversations where we're sharing different perspectives on things, then really what are we doing? So it's quite important that we acknowledge that, and we know how to look after our own emotional responses and create spaces where people also feel safe to lean into some of those difficult conversations. That takes trusting relationships. Don't underestimate the importance of taking time to invest in that. The chats at the beginning of sessions, the chats in between sessions, the longitude of the engagement that might be happening, all very, very important. Those things take time. And also, Maja's already spoken about physical space, but one of my colleagues and volunteers once spoke about an engagement where he said, I've sat on more comfortable bricks. It was probably one of the least effective bits of engagement that had ever happened, run by another organization, but it would just, it was just a real marker of, just make it pleasant for people. Maja also talked about the showing of vulnerability, and this softening of professional boundaries is critical for those of us that are coming in as job titles or with job titles. It's really important that we don't stick to that we can bring in our whole selves as much as possible. So there is a kind of paradigm. You've got your professional life, you've got your personal life, and then there's your private life. And it's okay to have stuff that is private. We don't need to unburden everything onto people. But softening those professional boundaries, bringing more of our whole selves into these spaces is really important, because we're asking others to do that too. It creates trust. And finally, talking to the point that was raised earlier, understanding that there will be resistance. This way of working is super uncomfortable. Right, next slide. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that slide has still been hidden. Never mind. So before we come on to this, we will share with you information about resources, toolkits, training, websites that you can go to find out more information. We have a community of practice for service design and employability. If you would like to join that, well, I will send an invitation out to everybody that's attended. You can sign up if you would like to. You can speak to me. I can put you in touch with colleagues that are doing this work elsewhere. So basically, there's lots of support to try and help you on your journey. I started talking about why this matters to, cheers, Barbara, and thanks, in terms of meeting this principle about our services being driven by evidence, including the experience of users. But in my experience, and hopefully you've got this from today, it also helps many others. So I think we might have 4, possibly 5 clicks here, Jane. So go for it. It helps with dignity and respect. Yes. It helps with fairness and equality. Absolutely. And it will help us with having a continuous improvement mindset in the work that we're doing. It will ensure we're getting person-centered support. And I think the final one should come up, hopefully, or maybe it's not worked. There should be one more. But anyway, the last one is down at the bottom. Yes, it should support more people to move into the right job at the right time, because that is how these things work. So we've got a couple of minutes left. If we go to the last slide, really just wanted to give an opportunity to people to share anything that has surprised you or anything that is new learning that's come from today. So yeah, I think we can probably drop down the slides and just open the floor to you all before we say thank you very much.
Can I say something quickly? So
Yes, Heather, welcome.
Also, I put my mic down, that would make help people hear me. So I kind of lead on our young persons program, and we had a young persons advisory group, but what we found was that we didn't have that many things for young people to input on regularly. And obviously young people were kind of moving into different opportunities, and actually keeping a core group together wasn't working. And I just wanted to get people's opinions on whether do you tend to engage with lots of different people kind of just on a rolling basis, depending on what you want input on or what topics are coming up, or do you kind of, if you do have a core group, how do you keep that sustainable kind of in the longer term, I guess?
I think that's a really interesting question. I'll give my best effort a reply and see if Maja and Zsara can come up with, but I think it's a really important one, because there is no point maintaining or forcing people to come together if there is nothing useful for them to talk about. And at the same time, if you're creating a listening space, you might, and allowing them to set the agenda and say things that are bugging them, you might learn something incredibly useful that would change how you're thinking about what you're doing. So maybe there's something about that which might be a useful thing to think about, and actually that becomes a bit more of a bottom-up space as well. Yeah, that would be my initial thought. I'm seeing a few little nods, but I don't know, Maja and Zsara, would you have anything you'd add to that?
I think finding other, a bit going off of what you were saying just there, Pegs, like finding other things for them to come together around, and it doesn't always have to, that they're of value to them, right? It doesn't always have to be with the agenda to like answer these questions, but other things might arise. But I think it's hard to say really without knowing more of the context. I feel like it's one of those things that is something we always say is, there's no like one size fits all, so what will be right for you will be very different. Yeah, Zsara.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is tricky, because not having something to kind of, I suppose, keep that group together. Something that can be helpful is if there's already an existing group or an existing activity or something that kind of meets with any kind of regularity to kind of piggyback onto, can be really helpful. Or if there's other events, things like, family fun days, things like that you can have a kind of presence at, and have some of these conversations. So yeah, like Maja said, it depends very much on the context, but we're always looking for ways to kind of piggyback on existing things. So I'm not sure if that's helpful.
No, definitely. Thank you so much, all. I really appreciate that.
Any other comments or themes? There's a few bits in the chat. Someone with a weekly discussion group, they pick the theme for the following week. Yep, absolutely, sounds brilliant. Mixed ages work better. Again, very interesting. And yeah, people coming and going each week, so you've got that drop in. So there's a few people that have said they've used that, yeah, and that can be helpful. Any other reflections or questions or anything?
It's really helpful to hear people's reflections and questions, because we do use this to shape our offers and what we do going forward, how we deliver these things. So we're not just asking because somebody said, "Oh, get some feedback." It's because we actually really use it.
It's so true. And that reminds me, I will just say while people are thinking, and I've just actually looked at the time having said that, we are out of time, so you can stay on and ask questions. We will do that. Jane has a survey she wants to pop in the chat for the evaluation. Please take 2 minutes as you finish up on this call to fill in that feedback form. It genuinely is something we listen to, and it does genuinely inform not just general thematic workshops, but also the work we're doing around service design and supporting that community of practice. And yeah, if you are interested, I'll pop in the chat my email address as well, just in case people don't have it. If you're interested in that service design community of practice or just any further chat, then you can email me. I will probably just forward you on the date for the next community practice, and you can decline it or not as you see fit. Okay, well, in that case, without further ado, I shall say a huge thank you to Jane for being our technical host, and amazingly to Maja and Zsara for their fantastic knowledge, insight, and really clear and simple ways of explaining service design and what that means in practice. And thank you to you all for coming along. Really great to see you.